The sacred isolation, why rejection was actually your anointing. There's a moment in almost every black sheep's life when they ask themselves, why me? Why couldn't I just be like everyone else? Why was I born into this family, into this system, into this chaos that never seemed to understand me, never welcomed me, and often even punished me for simply being who I am? If you've ever asked that question, then this message isn't just a video, it's a mirror. Because what if I told you that your exile, your difference, your pain was not a mistake? What if you were never meant to fit in? What if you were chosen? Let's sit with that word for a moment, chosen. We tend to think of God's chosen ones as the holy, the pure, the light-filled. But history, and deeper still, mystery, tells us something very different. Some of the most powerful instruments of divine will were not saints in gold robes. They were broken men in caves, weeping women at wells, warriors with blood on their hands, and yes, black sheep cast out by their own kin. When spirit wants to shake the world, it doesn't look for the polished. It looks for the raw. Because only the raw can crack open what's been sealed shut by time, comfort, and illusion. And who better to do that than the one who never belonged? If you've always felt like the outsider, the misunderstood, the rejected one, then you've already passed the first test. The test of resistance. Because you didn't collapse. You didn't conform. You didn't lose the essence of who you are, even when you were punished for it. That is spiritual resilience. And spiritual resilience is the soil from which sacred power grows. Think of the great prophets, the mystics, the revolutionaries. None of them were embraced by their people at first. They were mocked, exiled, hunted. But the wilderness became their teacher. The silence became their scripture. And when they returned, they didn't return seeking validation. They returned carrying revelation. But let's bring this home to you. What if your family's rejection wasn't just dysfunction, but divine orchestration? What if the very people who dismissed you were part of your soul contract to push you out of the herd so you could find a higher frequency? You see, black sheep don't just wander, they are pushed out. And that push is painful. It feels like betrayal, abandonment, isolation. But from a higher perspective, it's an initiation. You are not being cast aside. You are being set apart. And in that space of pain and aloneness, something sacred begins to happen. The voices of the world grow silent, and the whisper of the soul grows louder. For the first time, you start hearing you. Now here's the paradox. The very qualities that got you rejected are the ones that make you powerful. Your sensitivity, your anger, your questioning, your refusal to play along, all of that is not a flaw. It's a signal that your soul came here to do something different. Something radical, something disruptive. And those who cling to the old system will always crucify the disruptor, until the disruptor becomes the very one who saves them. But until then, the black sheep must walk through the fire alone, not to be purified in the way religion has taught us, but to be forged. Because only what has been through the fire can carry the fire. You might be thinking, how do I survive that fire? How do I keep going when everyone I love sees me as the problem? The answer is not easy, but it's real. You stop trying to be loved by those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to be accepted by those still asleep. And you start remembering your own divinity. You start reclaiming the parts of you that you had to bury in order to belong. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, you begin to come back to life. Not the life they wanted for you, but the life you were born for. Let me ask you a question that might change everything. What would happen if you stopped trying to earn your place at the table and realized you were sent to build a new one? What if your very rejection was the announcement of your calling? What if you were never supposed to fit into the system because you were born to rewrite it? This is not ego. This is not delusion. This is destiny. And destiny often comes wrapped in suffering because it needs to burn away everything that isn't real. So here we are. You, the black sheep. Me, once a black sheep too. And all of us, slowly remembering that we are not mistakes. We are messages. Living messages. Messy, raw, unpolished, but unmistakably sacred. And the world doesn't need more perfection. It needs more truth. And the truth is, the darkest chosen ones are often the ones who are pushed away the hardest, because only they have the strength to walk alone into the unknown and come back carrying light. The divine rebellion, how black sheep break generational curses by refusing to conform. To be the black sheep is to carry the weight of what the rest of the lineage refused to face. It is not just emotional, it is ancestral. You inherit not just trauma, but assignments. You feel the tension of generations inside your chest. You speak truths that no one else in your bloodline had the courage to utter. You make choices that ripple backward, shaking the bones of the forgotten dead and forward, clearing paths for descendants not yet born. You are the interruption, the fracture in the pattern, the rebellion made flesh, and that rebellion, when conscious, is divine. Most people live their entire lives in the echo of their family's belief systems, not because they truly believe them, but because they're afraid of being exiled. But the black sheep, you already were exiled, so the fear is no longer relevant. The spell has already broken. That's what makes you powerful. You've seen behind the curtain. You've watched the roles your family plays, the masks they wear, the silence they swim in. And you chose not to play along. That one act of not pretending is what begins the breaking of the curse. Because curses are not always voodoo or hexes. Sometimes they're just lies repeated for too long. Let's go deeper. Every family has an energetic blueprint, a psychic architecture built on years, centuries even, of unspoken pain, unresolved guilt, suppressed truths. The black sheep is the soul who incarnates to change the architecture, to demolish the haunted house. But here's the thing, you can't renovate a structure that's rotting. You have to tear it down, and demolition is messy. It looks like anger. It looks like distance. It looks like conflict. But beneath all of that is love, real love. Because only love is willing to suffer rejection in order to give birth to something clean. When you stop conforming, your family will call it betrayal. But it's not betrayal, it's liberation. You're not rejecting them. You're rejecting the lies that bind them, the roles they've been trapped in, the pain they've learned to normalize. And yes, they may not see it that way. They may shame you, guilt you, cut you off, but don't let that define you. Because the truth is, your courage is already doing the work. Even if they never say it, they feel it. Your freedom threatens their cage, and deep down, some part of them wants to be free too. That's why they react, because your light exposes their chains. You must understand this sacred paradox. Black sheep are not rebels out of rage, but out of remembrance. You remember a version of your lineage that existed before the trauma. You remember joy that was silenced, wisdom that was buried, giftings that were shamed. And by remembering, you start to rebuild. Not the old way, but something new, something ancient and futuristic all at once. You become the bridge, the living link between what was and what could be. That's why your path is so painful. You're not just walking it for yourself. You're walking it for all of them, even the ones who can't see it yet. So how do you stay strong when you're walking alone? You anchor into what's real. You create sacred space for yourself. You build new rituals. You surround yourself with chosen family, souls who see you, hear you, hold you. You stop trying to convince the old system to love you. You become the system you needed. You become the parent you didn't have, the sibling you longed for, the elder you wished existed. And in doing so, you don't just break the curse, you replace it. You offer the lineage a new frequency. And whether they accept it or not, the energetic offering exists. And that means the work is done. Let me ask you something that only you can answer. What parts of yourself have you buried just to avoid being called too much? What gifts have you silenced because they weren't welcome in your bloodline? What dreams did you abandon because they didn't fit the family narrative? If you truly are the divine rebel, then your next step is not to argue. It's to reclaim. Reclaim your fire. Reclaim your truth. Reclaim your soul. Not to convince them, but to become you. Because when the black sheep becomes whole, the entire flock begins to shift. Not because you forced them, but because you freed yourself. The silent throne. How black sheep rise in power by embracing who they were never allowed to be. There is a moment after the rebellion, after the exile, after the long walk through the wilderness, where something unexpected happens to the black sheep. They stop fighting, not because they're defeated, but because they've remembered something deeper than resistance: sovereignty. The black sheep who survives the fire becomes something sacred, not a follower, no array, but a sovereign soul who no longer seeks permission to exist. And this is where true power begins, not in the noise, but in the calm knowing of who you are, even if no one else sees it yet. You begin to sit on a throne that no one gave you, but one that's been waiting for you all along. A throne built from the bones of your silence, your solitude, your suffering. And it doesn't need to be seen to be real. When you embrace who you were never allowed to be, you reclaim not just your identity, but your inheritance. Not the material kind, but the spiritual kind. The kind that was locked away under generations of suppression. The kind that was buried the moment your ancestors stopped listening to their own inner voice. You reclaim the medicine, the vision, the intuitive abilities, the deep emotional intelligence, the creative fire, the warrior spirit, and all the things they feared in you suddenly become your greatest tools. You were never too much. You were always too true. And now that truth becomes your compass. You no longer need their approval. You found your own. This is where people start to whisper about you. They've changed. They're different now. They're distant. But the truth is, you're not distant, you've just risen. You've stopped explaining yourself to those who never listened. You've stopped shrinking to fit rooms that were never built to hold you. You've stopped offering your light to those who only came to extinguish it. And from that place of inner alignment, you start to attract everything that once eluded you. Not because you chased it harder, but because you stopped chasing it all. You became it. And what you become, you magnetize. This is the silent throne. Power without performance. Authority without apology. Presence without pretense. People feel it. They don't need to understand it. Your energy speaks before your mouth ever opens. And when it does open, your words carry weight, not because you're loud, but because they're true. You no longer speak to be heard. You speak because the silence has refined your message. You've touched the sacred wound. You've kissed your own shadow. You've walked alone long enough to know that your path was never meant to be crowded. And now, your solitude becomes your sanctuary. Your past becomes your prophecy. But here's the twist. Once you rise, you realize something else. You no longer need revenge. You no longer need validation. You no longer need the people who hurt you to admit they were wrong. Because you've outgrown the story. You've transcended the cycle. You've become the end of the curse. And that means you no longer carry the weight of being seen. You carry the freedom of having seen yourself. That's real power. And it's quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It simply is. And when others encounter it, they either rise with it or run from it. Either way, it's not your burden. So where do you go from here? You create, you lead, you build, you speak, but only from alignment, only from love, only from truth, not to prove anything, but because it's finally safe for the real you to exist. That's the gift of the silent throne. It gives you back to yourself. And when you have yourself, you have everything. You can walk into any room. You can lose any relationship. You can start over from zero and still know who you are, because your identity is no longer attached to being accepted. It's rooted in being authentic. And authentic people change the world, not by force, but by frequency. Let me ask you this. What would your life look like if you stopped waiting for permission? If you chose, right now, to be exactly who you were never allowed to be, what would open up? What would fall away? What would finally begin? Because the throne is not out there, it's in you. And the moment you sit in it fully, the world begins to respond. Not because you demanded it, but because you aligned with it. This is your moment. Not to return to who they wanted you to be, but to rise as who you actually are. The black sheep, the divine rebel, the curse breaker, the silent throne bearer, and the one we've all been waiting for. There's something almost mystical about the pain the black sheep carries. It's not just their own, it's collective, inherited, subterranean. It's the pain of grandmothers who were silenced, of fathers who never cried, of children who never felt safe enough to dream freely. The black sheep becomes the living altar where all that suppressed emotion rises to be witnessed. That's why your emotions feel overwhelming. That's why your intuition feels like a burden. You're not just processing your own story. You're metabolizing the soul memory of an entire bloodline. But here's the miracle. When you feel what others refuse to feel, you free what others never could. Your tears, those same ones they mocked, are sacred water, cleansing centuries of silence. To truly embody your role as God's darkest chosen one, you must stop seeing your pain as a punishment and start seeing it as initiation. You weren't sent into this family, this life, this body by accident. You were assigned. And your assignment is not to fix anyone. It's to become fully yourself in a system that was designed to erase you. Every time you speak your truth, you collapse centuries of suppression. Every time you break a pattern, whether it's emotional avoidance, generational shame, or inherited scarcity, you are rewriting the blueprint. Not just for your life, but for every soul connected to yours. That's why it feels heavy. Because it is, but it's also holy. Let me offer you something radical. What if your darkness is not something to hide, but something to honor? What if the parts of you they feared, your wildness, your sensitivity, your anger, your intensity, are not flaws but functions? What if they're the exact tools needed to destroy the old architecture and build something divine in its place? Your darkness is not a curse, it's a compass. It points you toward what's real, what's true, what's raw. And when you stop judging it, when you stop apologizing for it, when you integrate it, you unlock a level of spiritual authority that can't be taught. It can only be earned through fire. And you've walked through that fire. Now it's time to rise from it. So here's the final question I leave you with, one that only your soul can answer. If you embraced every part of yourself you've been taught to hide, who would you become? Not the version they molded, not the version you performed, but the unfiltered version, the sacred outlaw, the divine disruptor, the one who walks into a room and shifts the frequency without saying a word. That version of you is not a fantasy, it's a memory, a soul memory. And the more you return to it, the more the world around you begins to change. Because when the black sheep remembers who they are, they stop trying to find a home and start becoming one. There's a sacred loneliness that comes with being the black sheep, one that no crowd, no applause, no external success can ever truly soothe. Because your ache isn't for attention, it's for authentic resonance. You're not longing to be seen, you're longing to be recognized, soul to soul, beyond the masks. And until that kind of connection arrives, you will feel like you're walking through a world that speaks a language you never learned. But don't let that ache convince you that you're broken. That ache is the compass of the chosen ones. It doesn't point you toward people, it points you back to yourself. Because only when you fully meet you will the ones who can meet you find you. What we often forget is that being chosen doesn't always look like glory. Sometimes it looks like grief, like nights spent questioning your worth, like having to love people who can't love you back without conditions, like leaving behind everything familiar just to stay loyal to your truth. But every spiritual contract has a cost, and those who are chosen to disrupt the old patterns must be willing to lose the very systems they were born into. That's the price. But here's the grace. What you lose in comfort, you gain in clarity. You stop mistaking belonging for safety. You stop mistaking silence for peace. You stop mistaking family for alignment. And you start building a life that actually reflects your soul, not your trauma. To walk the path of the black sheep is to walk with paradox. You are both the destroyer and the healer, the storm and the sanctuary, the outsider and the oracle. And this is why your life doesn't make sense to most people. It's not meant to. You're not here to be understood. You're here to be felt. Your presence alone is a sermon. Your energy is the exorcism. You don't need to explain your process. You are the process. And the more you live it unapologetically, the more you give others permission to do the same. That's how the divine works through the black sheep, not by making them louder, but by making them truer. So let's end with the deepest truth of all. You were never rejected, you were redirected. You were never cast out, you were carved out for something rare, something real. God's darkest chosen ones are not the ones who shine the brightest in public. They are the ones who glow silently in the dark, who carry torches into places no one else is willing to go. And if you're reading this, feeling something ancient stir inside you, then you already know. You don't need validation. You don't need saving. You've always had the map inside you. Now is the time to stop hiding your light just because it burns a little differently. Let it burn. Let it guide. Let it set others free.